No doctor could reach the dying Navy SEAL sniper until one nurse knew his call sign. The monitor flatlined, then spiked, an erratic, terrifying rhythm that mimicked a battlefield heartbeat. Inside the fortified trauma bay of St. Jude's Naval Hospital, a legend was fading. Liam Smith, the Navy SEAL sniper known as the Wraith, lay strapped to a gurney, his body a map of scars, his mind locked in a fortress no doctor could breach. 3 neurologists had already walked away, declaring him a lost cause, a living ghost trapped in a shut-down syndrome, so profound that the machines were the only thing proving he was alive. They saw a broken weapon. But in the shadows, Nurse Emma Johnson saw something else. She saw the boy who had once protected her from the monsters. As the chief of surgery reached for the sedation that would bury Liam's consciousness forever, Emma realized she was the only one holding the key. She didn't have a medical cure. She had a secret, a call sign from a childhood they survived together. And she had one chance to use it before they dragged her away. Dr. Aris Thorne was a man who believed that the human body was merely an engine. Engines had schematics. They had fuel lines and ignition switches. If an engine stalled, you didn't ask it how it felt. You forced it to turn over. Thorne, the chief of trauma surgery, stood over Liam Smith's motionless body like a mechanic frustrated by a vintage car that refused to start. Pupils are fixed and non-reactive to light, but his EEGs are screaming, Thorne muttered, stripping off his latex gloves with a sharp snap that echoed in the sterile room. He threw the gloves into the biohazard bin with unnecessary force. It's chaotic brain activity. He's in there, but he's fighting us. It's like he's holding the door shut from the inside. The trauma bay was a symphony of blue light and grey steel. Monitors chirped their indifferent songs. Beep, 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 counting down the seconds of a life that seemed to be evaporating. Liam Smith looked less like a man and more like a ruin. His torso, exposed to the chilled air of the hospital, was a tapestry of violence. There was the puckered starburst of a bullet wound near his clavicle, old and silvered by time. There were the jagged white lines of shrapnel scars crossing his ribs like lightning strikes. And there were the tattoos, ink faded by desert suns, that spoke of brotherhoods and deaths that the civilians in this room could not comprehend. He's stabilized physically, doctor. A resident ventured nervously, looking at the vitals. BP is 110/70. Heart rate is 45. He's an athlete. His body is fine. It's the mind that's rejected the host. I don't need a philosophy lecture, residents, Thorne snapped, shining a penlight into Liam's unseeing eyes again. The eyes were a startling, piercing blue, like glacial ice, but they looked through Thorne, through the ceiling, staring at a horizon only Liam could see. I need a response. We have Naval Command breathing down our necks. This man is a Tier 1 asset. If he dies on my table because he simply refuses to wake up, it's my head. Emma Johnson stood in the shadows near the crash cart, her hands clasped tightly in front of her scrub top. She was invisible to men like Dr. Thorne. To him, she was just part of the furniture, a dispenser of medications and a changer of sheets. She was 28, with messy chestnut hair tucked under a scrub cap and eyes that held a quiet, exhausted intelligence. She watched Liam's chest rise and fall. Too slow. Intentional. She knew that breathing pattern. It wasn't the breathing of a coma patient. It was the breathing of a sniper regulating his heart rate before a shot. He's not dying, Emma thought, a chill racing down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He's hiding. Administer 2 milligrams of Ativan, Thorne ordered, rubbing his temples. If he's in a psychogenic seizure, we need to break the loop. If that doesn't work, prepare for intubation. We need to secure the airway before his brain decides to stop telling his lungs to work." "Doctor," Emma spoke up. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper over the hum of the ventilator. Thorne turned, blinking, as if surprised the furniture had spoken. "Nurse Johnson, did I ask for an opinion?" "No, sir," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly but her chin high. "But sedating him might be dangerous. If he's conscious but locked in, suppressing his respiratory drive could trigger a panic response. He might arrest." Thorne laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He is a Navy SEAL, nurse. He is trained to withstand torture, not panic because of a sedative. This man has likely endured things that would stop your heart just hearing about them." "Do not presume to know the physiology of a predator." "I don't know his physiology," Emma lied, her eyes darting to the faint, jagged scar on Liam's left forearm. A scar she knew matched a jagged piece of rusted metal from a chain-link fence in Ohio 20 years ago. "I just know. He looks like he's waiting." "Waiting for what? The rapture?" Thorne turned back to the resident. "Push the Ativan. Now." Emma stepped back as the resident moved in with the syringe. She watched the needle pierce the IV port. She watched the clear liquid flow into Liam's vein. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. Liam didn't drift off. His back arched off the mattress, the cords of his neck straining like steel cables. The heart monitor went from a slow, predatory 45 beats per minute to a screaming 180 in the span of 3 seconds. The alarms began to wail, a cacophony of panic. "Vitak!" the resident screamed. "He's going into cardiac arrest." "I told you!" Emma shouted, breaking protocol, rushing forward. "He thinks he's under attack." "Charge the paddles!" Thorne roared, panic finally cracking his arrogant facade. "Clear!" Liam's body convulsed, thrashing against the restraints. His eyes were wide open now, terrified and feral, seeing enemies in the fluorescent lights. He wasn't in a hospital in Virginia. In his mind, he was somewhere else, somewhere dark and bloody. "Don't touch him!" Emma yelled, shoving the resident's hand away from the defib button. It was a career-ending move, physical insubordination. But she didn't care. "Everyone back off! You're drowning him!" "Security!" Thorne bellowed. "Get this woman out of here!" 2 orderlies rushed in, grabbing Emma by the arms. As they dragged her back, she locked eyes with the thrashing, dying man on the table. She saw the boy he used to be, the boy who had held her hand while they hid in the closet from the thunder. "Liam!" she screamed, her voice cracking. But he couldn't hear her. The machine gun fire in his head was too loud. The orderlies dragged her through the double doors, and the last thing she saw was Dr. Thorne pressing the paddles to Liam's chest, trying to shock a heart that was only breaking because it was terrified. 3 hours later, the storm outside had intensified, mirroring the wreckage inside Emma's career. She had been suspended, pending an immediate review. Technically, she wasn't even supposed to be in the building. She should have been in the parking lot, crying in her rusted Honda Civic, driving home to her empty apartment. But she couldn't leave. She sat in the darkened waiting room of the ICU, wearing a stolen hoodie over her scrubs to hide her identity. The hospital was quieter now, the graveyard shift settling in like a heavy fog. The only sounds were the distant squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum and the rhythmic whoosh click of ventilators. Liam had survived the code. Barely. Thorne had managed to stabilize him, but the shutdown syndrome had deepened. He was catatonic. The doctors had labeled it refractory PTSD with dissociative fugue. They had placed him in a private, high-security room at the end of the hall, guarded by a solitary military police officer who looked barely old enough to shave. Emma stared at the cold coffee in her hands. The liquid rippled, and in the reflection, she saw the past. Ohio, 1998. The foster home was a crumbling Victorian house that smelled of mold and boiled cabbage. It was a warehouse for unwanted things. Emma was 8, skinny and mute with fear. Liam was 10, already possessing that intense, brooding silence that would one day make him a lethal sniper. They were the outcasts among the outcasts. The other kids were loud, fighting for scraps of attention. Liam and Emma were ghosts. They found solace in the old oak tree in the backyard, climbing high above the rot of their reality. "Why don't you talk?" Liam had asked her one day, hanging upside down from a branch. "Words hurt," she had whispered. It was the first thing she'd said in months. Liam had nodded solemnly. "Yeah, but silence can be loud, too." He had pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, a page torn from a stolen library book. With surprisingly delicate fingers, he folded it. A crease here, a tuck there. Within seconds, he held out a perfect white paper bird. "It's a crane," he said. "Legend says if you fold 1,000, you get a wish." "What's your wish?" Emma asked. "To fly away," he said, looking at the grey sky. "To be unreachable." He handed her the bird. "If you ever get scared, Em, just hold this. I'm your wingman. I'll always find you. But we need a code. Spies have codes." "A code?" "Yeah, a call sign. Something only we know. So if the bad guys are listening, they won't understand." Emma had looked at the paper bird, then at the bright star appearing through the twilight clouds. She whispered a name. Liam had smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and nodded. "Okay, that's it. That's the signal. Present day." Emma crushed the paper cup in her hand. 20 years. They had been separated when the foster home was shut down by the state. Liam went into the systems grinder, eventually finding the Navy. Emma went to a different family, eventually finding nursing. She had followed his career through news snippets and rumors. The wraith of the Hindu Kush, the silent guardian. She had prayed he was safe. She had never expected him to end up in her trauma bay, destroyed not by a bullet, but by the weight of the lives he had taken. She stood up. The MP at the door of room 402 was nodding off, his chin dipping toward his chest. Emma pulled her hoodie up. She knew the layout of the ICU better than anyone. She knew the blind spots in the security cameras. She moved silently, her nursing shoes making no sound. She was a ghost again, just like in the orphanage. She slipped past the sleeping guard and pushed the door to room 402 open. The room was dark, lit only by the amber glow of the IV pumps. Liam lay in the bed, looking smaller without his armor. His face was pale, his features drawn tight in a grimace of eternal pain. His hands, resting on the sheets, were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. Emma approached the bed. She didn't check the monitors. She checked him. She placed her hand gently over his clenched fist. His skin was burning hot. "Liam," she whispered. No response. The monitor beeped steadily. Beep, beep, beep. "Thorne thinks you're broken," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "He thinks you're a machine that ran out of oil. But I know you're just in the tree, Liam. You pulled up the ladder." His eyelid fluttered. Just a tremor. "You're safe here," she said, her voice catching. "But you have to come down. You have to breathe." She took a deep breath. This was it. The breach of protocol, the violation of every medical rule. But it was the only way. She leaned in until her lips brushed his ear. She smelled the antiseptic soap and the faint, metallic scent of old blood. "Paper crane," she whispered. The reaction was subtle, but to Emma it was an earthquake. Liam's fist unclenched, his fingers calloused and scarred, uncurled slowly, like a flower blooming in winter. He turned his head on the pillow just an inch toward the sound of her voice. "Paper Crane," she repeated, firmer this time. "This is Lost Girl. Do you copy?" The heart monitor skipped a beat, then another. The rhythm changed. It wasn't the chaotic panic of earlier. It was a surge of recognition. Liam's lips parted. His throat worked, dry and rusty. He didn't open his eyes, but a sound escaped him, a rasping, broken whisper that shattered the silence of the room. "Copy!" Tears spilled onto Emma's cheeks. He was there. He was alive. But before she could say another word, the lights in the room blazed on. "Step away from the patient!" Emma spun around. "Doctor!" Thorne stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed MPS and the hospital administrator. Thorne's face was purple with rage. "You are trespassing, Ms. Johnson," Thorne hissed. "And you are tampering with a critical patient. Get her out of here and call the police." "He spoke!" Emma cried as the MPs grabbed her. "He answered me. You have to listen." "He is hallucinating," Thorne yelled back. "You are agitating him. Get her out." As they dragged her away for the second time that night, Emma looked back. Liam's eyes were open now. They were wide, terrified, and searching the room. He was looking for the source of the call sign. He was looking for his wingman. And as the door swung shut, leaving him alone with the doctors who didn't understand him, Emma saw his lips move one more time. He mouthed a single word, invisible to everyone but her. The holding room in the hospital's administrative wing was designed to strip a person of hope. It was a windowless box of beige drywall and polished linoleum, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. Emma sat at a metal table, her hands still shaking, the tactile memory of Liam's burning skin still pressed against her palm. She wasn't arrested, not yet, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Aris Thorne paced the small room like a tiger in a cage that was too small for its ego. He had removed his white coat, revealing a pristine dress shirt that seemed immune to the sweat and grime of the trauma bay. "Do you have any idea the level of scrutiny we are under?" Thorne stopped pacing and slammed his hands onto the table, leaning into Emma's face. "Liam Smith is not just a patient. He is a classified asset. He is a decorated war hero. And I have a nurse, a trauma nurse, with a spotless record until tonight, breaking into a secured ICU room to whisper nonsense into his ear." "It wasn't nonsense," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "It was a call sign," Thorne scoffed, straightening up and adjusting his cufflinks. "A call sign. You think because you read a Tom Clancy novel, you understand naval special warfare protocols. This is a medical facility, Ms. Johnson, not a spy movie. The man has severe frontal lobe inactivity. He did not speak to you. He had a reflexive laryngeal spasm which you, in your delusion, interpreted as speech. He said copy, Emma insisted, looking past Thorne to the mirror on the wall, knowing there were eyes behind it. He responded to Paper Crane. It's a trigger, a safety anchor. We grew up together, Doctor. I know how his mind works better than your machines do. Thorne froze. You knew him. Personal connection is a conflict of interest. This makes it worse. You're projecting your childhood nostalgia onto a vegetable. The door to the holding room opened with a heavy clack of magnetic locks, disengaging. A woman stepped in. She wore the dress blues of a Navy commander, her presence immediately sucking the oxygen out of Thorne's tirade. She had steel-grey hair cut into a sharp bob, and eyes that looked like they could read small print from a mile away. "Commander Vance," Thorne said, his voice shifting instantly from aggressive to obsequious. "I apologize for the disturbance. We are handling the situation. Ms. Johnson will be terminated and escorted off the premises immediately." Commander Vance didn't look at Thorne. She looked at Emma. She pulled out a metal chair and sat down, her movements precise and economical. "Dr. Thorne," Vance said, her voice cool and low. "My MP at the door, Corporal Hernandez, filed an incident report 10 minutes ago. He claims he heard the patient speak." Thorne flushed. "Hernandez is a 20-year-old kid who was half asleep. He heard a groan. He wrote down the word copy," Vance corrected. She placed a folder on the table. "And he wrote down what Ms. Johnson said prior to the response. Paper crane." Vance opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of redacted paper, mostly black ink, with a few visible lines. "Liam Smith's file is classified," Vance said, tapping the paper. "But in his psychological evaluation, from BUD/S training, 14 years ago, the psychologist asked him to visualize a safe place for stress management. Most men visualize a beach or a bar or their girlfriend's bed. Smith visualized a paper bird." Emma felt her heart slam against her ribs. He remembered. "That doesn't mean anything," Thorne sputtered. "Coincidence." "In intelligence, Doctor, there is no such thing as coincidence," Vance said, finally turning her icy gaze to him. "However, your medical assessment stands. The man is dying. His brain is shutting down. If Miss Johnson has found a back door, I want to know." "She almost killed him," Thorne shouted, losing his composure. "She triggered a cardiac event earlier. I cannot allow a rogue nurse to interfere with my patient based on childhood fairy tales. I am the chief of surgery. My word is final." Vance paused, weighing the politics of the room. The military needed the hospital's cooperation. Thorne was powerful. "Fine," Vance said, standing up. "Ms. Johnson, you are suspended pending a full investigation. If you step foot on this floor again, you will be arrested for trespassing on federal property. Do I make myself clear?" Emma looked at Vance, seeing a flicker of regret in the commander's eyes. Vance wanted to believe, but she couldn't break the chain of command for a hunch. "Crystal clear, Commander," Emma whispered. "Get her out of my sight," Thorne sneered. 2 MPs escorted Emma out of the room, down the long, sterile corridor, and out into the rainy night. They left her on the curb, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her, with a finality that felt like a prison sentence. Emma stood in the rain, the water soaking through her hoodie. She looked up at the 4th floor, at the single window with the blinds drawn. "I'm not leaving you, Liam," she whispered to the rain. "I promised. Wingman." The world was white. It wasn't the white of a hospital sheet or a blank page. It was the white of absolute zero. It was a blinding, stinging emptiness that stretched in every direction, erasing the horizon. Liam Smith sat on the edge of a rooftop. Or maybe it was a cliff. It was hard to tell where the concrete ended and the abyss began. The wind howled around him, carrying voices he tried not to listen to. "Take the shot, Smith. Take the shot." He looked down at his hands. They were encased in gloves, holding a rifle that felt heavy, like it was made of the same lead as his bones. He tried to let go of the weapon, but his fingers were frozen to the metal. He was fused with the instrument of his trade. He knew, in the vague, dreamlike way one knows things in a nightmare, that he had been waiting here for a long time. Years, maybe. He was waiting for a target. But he couldn't remember who the target was. Was it a terrorist? A general? Or was it the boy he used to be? The cold was a physical weight. It started in his toes and worked its way up, turning his blood to slush. He knew that if the cold reached his heart, he would never leave this roof. He would become a gargoyle, a stone statue watching over a ruined city forever. Let it come, a part of him thought, I'm tired. I've run enough." He closed his eyes, welcoming the numbness. It was easier this way. No more noise, no more recoil. Just silence. Then a sound cut through the wind. It wasn't a radio transmission. It wasn't an order. "Paper crane." The words didn't come from the sky. They came from inside his own chest. They were warm, like a mouthful of hot coffee on a freezing morning. Liam's eyes snapped open. In the swirling snow in front of him, something materialized. It wasn't a person. It was a small, white object, fluttering erratically against the gale. A paper bird. It defied the physics of the storm. The wind should have shredded it. The snow should have buried it. But the little crane flew, dipping and diving, fighting its way toward him. "Liam, come down." The voice was familiar. It smelled like rain and antiseptic. It sounded like the girl who used to bandage his scraped knees when he fell out of the oak tree. "Em?" He tried to stand, but his legs were frozen to the ledge. The ice had crept up to his waist. The paralysis of the shut-down syndrome was manifesting here as a glacier encasing his body. The paper bird landed on the barrel of his rifle. It was tiny, fragile, and perfect. It glowed with a faint, amber light. "This is Lost Girl," the voice whispered, echoing through the canyons of his mind. "Do you copy?" Liam forced his jaw to work. The ice cracked on his face. He felt pain, sharp, searing pain, as the numbness receded. Pain was good. Pain meant life. "Copy," he croaked into the storm. But as soon as he spoke, the sky darkened. The wind turned into a roar. A giant, shadowy hand, Thorn's hand, made of storm clouds and arrogance, swept down from the heavens. It snatched the paper bird away, crushing it. "No!" Liam screamed, lunging forward, tearing his legs free from the ice with a sickening crunch. He reached out for the bird, but the darkness swallowed it. The warmth vanished. He was alone on the roof again. But something had changed. The ice on his legs was broken. He could move. He stood up, his breath pluming in the freezing air. He wouldn't sit and wait for the cold anymore. He picked up his rifle, not to shoot, but to use as a crutch. He had to find the source of the voice. He had to find the lost girl. He began to walk into the blizzard. The diner across the street from the hospital was a 24-hour dive called the IV drip, a grim joke that only exhausted medical staff appreciated. At 3 a.m., it was mostly empty, save for a trucker eating pie and Emma Johnson, who was nursing a cup of tea she couldn't afford to pay for. She had been sitting there for 2 hours, watching the hospital entrance. She was trying to formulate a plan, but every scenario ended with her in handcuffs. She was a civilian now. She had no access card, no credentials, and her face was likely plastered on the security desk's "Do Not Admit" list. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message. Unknown number. "Don't look up. Keep drinking your tea." The black sedan in the parking lot. "Back seat is unlocked." Emma frowned, her pulse quickening. She glanced at the window without turning her head. In the rain-slicked parking lot, a nondescript black Ford sedan was idling. It was a trap. It had to be. Thorn calling the police? But she had nothing left to lose. She dropped a crumpled $5 bill on the table and walked out. The rain was cold, biting. She approached the sedan, her hand hovering over the handle. She took a breath and pulled the door open. She slid into the back seat. The driver didn't turn around, but in the rearview mirror, she saw the youthful, terrified eyes of Corporal Hernandez, the MP who had been guarding Liam's door. "You're crazy for getting in," Hernandez said, his voice shaking. "I could be court-martialed just for talking to you." "Why are you here, Corporal?" Emma asked, wringing out her wet sleeves. "Because I heard him," Hernandez said. He gripped the steering wheel tight. "My brother. He came back from Iraq 2 years ago. Same look in his eyes. The 1,000-yard stare. He killed himself 6 months later because no one could reach him. The doctors just gave him pills. Hernandez turned around to face her. I saw Smith's hand move, Mum. I saw his eyes change. You reached him. And that doctor, Thorne, he's going to kill him. Not on purpose, maybe, but he's going to let him fade away because he's too proud to admit he's wrong. I need to get back in there, Emma said. Impossible, Hernandez shook his head. Thorne has doubled the guard. He's got 2 MPs on the door now, and he's monitoring the room feed personally from his office. If you even step off the elevator, they'll tackle you. There has to be a way, a back entrance, a service lift. No, Hernandez said. But there is a window. Emma stared at him. He's on the 4th floor. St. Jude's is undergoing renovation on the east wing, Hernandez explained quickly. There's scaffolding. It runs up the side of the building, past the trauma ward. Room 402, Smith's room, is the corner unit. The scaffolding ends right below his window ledge. You want me to climb 4 stories of scaffolding in a rainstorm? Emma asked. I don't want you to do anything, Hernandez said, handing her a small, ruggedized walkie-talkie. I'm just telling you that the window latch on 402 is faulty. Maintenance put in a work order for it 3 weeks ago. It doesn't lock properly from the inside. He pressed the walkie-talkie into her hand. This is a closed-channel radio. I swiped it from supply. I'll be on the desk. If Thorne or the patrol comes down the hall, I'll click twice. If it's clear, I'll click once. Emma looked at the radio, then at the terrified young soldier. Why are you doing this? Because SEAL Team guys don't leave their own behind, Hernandez said, his voice firming up. And for tonight, Mom, you're his team. Emma nodded, pocketing the radio. She opened the car door. Thank you, Corporal. Don't fall, Hernandez whispered. Emma sprinted across the parking lot towards the east wing of the hospital. The construction site was a skeleton of steel and mesh against the night sky. The scaffolding rose like a jagged ladder into the darkness. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a climber. She was a nurse who spent 12 hours a day on her feet, who lifted patients twice her size. She had grit. She grabbed the cold, wet metal of the first bar and pulled herself up. The wind whipped her hair into her face. Her sneakers slipped on the wet piping. Below her, the concrete looked unforgiving. 1 bar at a time, she told herself, just like climbing the oak tree. She climbed. Her muscles burned. The rain blinded her. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, her hands were raw and bleeding. But she kept going. She looked up and saw the dim light of room 402. She reached the platform just below the window. She crouched there, gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She peered through the glass. The room was quiet. Liam was there, still and pale. But Dr. Thorne was there too. He was standing by the bed, adjusting the ventilator settings. He looked angry. He was muttering to himself, checking his watch. He injected something into Liam's IV line. A clear fluid. Emma froze. Thorne wasn't just checking on him. He was sedating him deeper. He was burying him so deep that no voice could ever reach him again. Thorne turned and walked out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Emma's radio clicked once, clear. She stood up on the slippery metal planks. She jammed her fingers under the window frame and shoved. It resisted for a moment. Then, with a groan of rusted metal, it slid upward. The wind howled into the room, fluttering the curtains. Emma tumbled over the sill, landing on the floor in a wet, shivering heap. She was in. She crawled to the bedside. Liam looked worse than before. His skin was grey. His breathing was shallow, forced by the machine. I'm here, she whispered, grabbing his hand. "I'm here, Liam." She needed something stronger than words this time. She needed a physical anchor. She reached into her pocket, where she had kept a secret for 20 years. It wasn't the original paper bird. That was long gone. But it was something he had given her the day they were separated. A dog tag. Not a military one. A cheap aluminum tag from a carnival machine, stamped with crooked letters. Wingman 1. She pressed the cold metal into his palm and curled his fingers around it. "Liam," she said, her voice fierce. "This is lost, girl. We are leaving the treehouse. Do you understand? We are walking out." On the monitor, the heart rate spiked. In the snowy wasteland of his mind, Liam stopped walking. He felt something hard and real in his hand. He looked down. The rifle was gone. In his hand was the silver tag. The snow stopped falling. The clouds parted. And far in the distance, he saw a light. Not a hospital light. A star. Emma squeezed his hand. "Come back to me." Liam's eyes opened, and this time, they didn't look through her. They looked at her. "Em," he rasped, his voice stronger this time. "Hostiles. Everywhere." "I know," Emma said, weeping with relief. "But I've got your 6. The room was a pressure cooker. Outside, the storm battered the glass. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and impending violence. Hostiles," Liam rasped again, his eyes darting frantically around the shadowy corners of the room. He tried to sit up, but his muscles, atrophied from weeks of immobility, failed him. He collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. "Perimeter. Breached." "Liam, listen to me," Emma said, keeping her voice low and steady, the voice she used for terrified children and dying elders. She placed her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. "There are no hostiles. You are in Virginia. You are safe. I'm Emma. Look at me." His blue eyes, dilated and wild, locked onto hers. For a second, the soldier vanished, and the boy from the foster home looked out. "Em! Yeah, it's me," she choked out, brushing a strand of sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. "I found you." Suddenly, the red light above the door began to flash. A heavy pounding shook the frame. "Open this door!" Dr. Thorne's voice was muffled but furious. "Security! Override the lock!" Liam flinched, his body seizing up. "They found us," he whispered, his hand groping for a weapon that wasn't there. He grabbed the plastic rail of the hospital bed with enough force to crack it. "We need to extract." "We can't move yet," Emma said, her mind racing. She looked at the door. The magnetic lock was disengaged. Hernandez had said it was faulty, but the heavy security deadbolt was engaging from the outside. Thorne had the master key. She had seconds. Emma grabbed the heavy crash cart, a rolling cabinet filled with emergency meds and defibrillators, and shoved it against the door. She jammed the wheels with a pair of trauma shears she pulled from her pocket. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them time. "Miss Johnson!" Thorne screamed from the hallway. "I know you are in there. You are compromising the patient. If he dies, it is murder." "He's awake!" Emma shouted back, her voice ringing with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. "He is talking, Thorne. He's back. Just give him a minute." "He is in a delirium," Thorne roared. "Break it down." The door shuddered as a heavy shoulder rammed against it. The crash cart slid an inch across the linoleum. Liam was hyperventilating. The monitor was screaming. Heart rate 160. BP 180 over 110. "Liam, breathe," Emma commanded, turning back to him. She saw him staring at the IV line in his arm, the one Thorne had injected moments ago. Liam ripped it out. Blood splattered onto the pristine white sheets. "Poison," he muttered. "They're dosing me." "It's okay," Emma said, grabbing a gauze pad and pressing it to the bleeding vein. "I won't let them touch you, but you have to stay with me. You can't go back to the roof. You hear me? No more rooftops." The pounding on the door stopped abruptly. A silence fell that was heavier than the noise. Then a new voice spoke through the intercom system near the bed. "This is Commander Vance." Her voice was calm, authoritative, and terrifyingly close. "Nurse Johnson, you are currently barricaded in a federal medical facility with a Tier 1 asset. I have a tactical team en route. You have 3 minutes to surrender before we breach." Emma looked at the speaker, then at Liam. He was watching her, waiting for a command. He trusted her. In this confused, broken reality, she was his commanding officer. "Commander," Emma said, pressing the talk button on the wall, her hand trembling. "I'm not surrendering, because if you come in here with guns, he will fight you. And in his condition, that will kill him. Is that what the Navy wants? A dead hero?" "We want him safe," Vance replied. "You are the danger right now." "I'm the only one he recognizes," Emma yelled. Ask him a question only he would know." There was a pause on the line. "Liam," Vance's voice came through, softer this time. "Chief Petty Officer Smith, if you can hear me, what is the motto of your unit?" Liam stared at the ceiling. His breathing hitched. He looked at Emma, and she nodded encouragingly. "You know this," her eyes said. Liam licked his dry lips. He took a rattling breath. "The only easy day," he whispered, his voice gaining strength, gravel grinding against steel, "was yesterday." Silence on the intercom. "And," Liam added, a dark clarity entering his eyes, "tell Thorne his sedation cocktail is sloppy. He's using too much propofol. Takes the edge off, but leaves the nightmares." Outside the door, Commander Vance held up a hand to the tactical team, preparing the battering ram. She looked at Dr. Thorne, who had gone pale. "He's lucid," Vance said, her eyes narrowing at the doctor. "You said he was a vegetable." It's a momentary rally," Thorne stammered. "Terminal lucidity. He will crash any second." "Stand down," Vance ordered the team. She leaned into the door. "Emma, I'm giving you 10 minutes. Stabilize him. If his vitals drop, we come in. If he crashes, you go to prison. Do you understand?" "Understood," Emma said, slumping against the bed frame. She turned to Liam. He wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was looking at his hands, hands that had taken lives, hands that were now trembling with weakness. "Why did you bring me back, Em?" he asked softly. The madness was receding, replaced by a crushing, profound sorrow. It was quiet in the snow. "Because it wasn't your time," she said, taking his hand again. "And because you owe me 1,000 paper cranes." The adrenaline of the siege began to fade, leaving a cold, hollow ache in the room. The storm outside had settled into a steady, morning rhythm. Inside, the only light came from the monitors, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Liam lay propped up against the pillows. Emma had cleaned the blood from his arm and given him sips of water. He looked older than 30. He looked ancient. The lines around his eyes were etched deep, scars of seeing things no human should see. "They call it shutdown syndrome," Emma said softly, sitting in the chair next to his bed. "The doctors say your brain just stopped, like a fuse blew." Liam stared at the dog tag in his hand. Wingman 1. He rubbed his thumb over the stamped letters. "It didn't blow," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I turned it off." Emma waited. She knew, instinctively, that this was the moment. The wound wasn't the shrapnel in his chest or the concussion. The wound was a story he had carried alone. "Kandahar," Liam began. He didn't look at her. He looked through the wall, back to the dust and the heat. 3 months ago, we were tracking a HVT, high-value target, a bomb maker, the guy who built the IEDs that took out Bravo team. He swallowed hard. We had intel he was moving through a village in the Petch Valley. I was on overwatch. High ground. 3,000 yards out. The wind was tricky, shifting from the east. Emma watched his hands. They were making small, subtle movements, adjusting a scope, testing the wind. Muscle memory. I saw him, Liam whispered. He came out of a compound. Positive ID. He was surrounded by guards, but he was holding something. A shield. Liam closed his eyes. A tear leaked out, cutting a clean track through the grime on his face. It wasn't a woman. It wasn't a soldier. It was a kid, a little girl, maybe 7 years old. Same age we were when we met, Em. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She was wearing a pink dress, Liam continued, his voice trembling. Bright pink against all that brown mud. And she was holding a kite. A white kite. It looked like a bird. He paused, his chest heaving. The target was using her. He knew we wouldn't shoot. He was walking her to a truck rigged with explosives. He was going to drive it into a market. Intel said if that truck left the village, 50 people would die. Maybe more. Liam! Emma reached for him, but he pulled his hand away. He needed to finish this. Protocol says you don't take the shot if there's a collateral risk, he said bitterly. But the truck was starting. The team was too far away to intercept. It was just me. Me and the wind and the math. He opened his eyes. They were haunted. 2 windows into hell. I calculated the trajectory. I could thread the needle. I could put the bullet through his head and miss the girl by 3 inches. 3 inches, Em. At 3,000 yards. You took the shot, Emma whispered. I took the shot, Liam nodded. The flight time was 4 seconds. Longest 4 seconds of my life. I watched the bullet trace in. Perfect arc. I hit him. Pink missed. He went down. You saved them, Emma said. You stopped the truck. He went down, Liam repeated, ignoring her. But as he fell, he jerked the girl back. Reflex, or maybe spite, and the bullet went through him. The silence in the room was absolute. It overpenetrated, Liam whispered. It went through his neck and it hit the kite. It hit the girl. He looked at his hands, staring at them with horror. I watched her fall through the scope. I saw the pink dress turn red. I saw the white kite flutter away in the wind, just like a paper crane. He looked at Emma, his face crumbling. I killed the bad guy, Em. I saved the market. I got a medal for it. But I didn't save the bird. I shot the bird. Emma felt tears streaming down her own face. She understood now. The snow, the cold, the roof. He wasn't hiding from the enemy. He was punishing himself. He had sentenced himself to a frozen prison because he believed he deserved the cold. That's why I shut down, Liam said, his voice barely audible. Because I promised you 20 years ago that I'd always protect the bird. And I failed. Emma stood up. She moved the bedrail aside and sat on the edge of the mattress. She took both of his hands in hers, forcing him to drop the invisible rifle he was still holding. Liam, look at me. He shook his head, shame radiating off him in waves. Look at me, she commanded. He looked up. You are not a machine, she said fiercely. You are a human being, and human beings break. That little girl, that wasn't your fault. That was the evil of the man who held her. You took a shot to save 50 lives. You carried the weight of 50 souls so their families wouldn't have to. It doesn't make it right, he sobbed. No, Emma said softly. It doesn't make it right. It makes it war, and it's terrible. But punishing yourself, freezing yourself to death in your own mind, that doesn't bring her back. It just kills the boy who made the cranes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the paper crane she had folded while waiting in the diner. It was made of a napkin, rough and uneven, but it was a crane. She placed it on his chest, right over his heart. "You didn't shoot the bird, Liam," she whispered. "The bird is right here. It's the part of you that hurts, the part of you that grieves. If you were a monster, you wouldn't feel this pain. You'd just reload." Liam looked at the crude paper bird, rising and falling with his breath. He looked at Emma, and for the first time in 3 months, the ice in his eyes began to melt. "I'm tired, Em," he whispered. "I'm so tired." "I know," she said, wrapping her arms around him, pulling his head onto her shoulder. "Rest now, no more rooftops. Just rest." Liam Smith, the Wraith, the Tier 1 asset, the weapon of war, finally closed his eyes, and he cried. He cried for the girl in the pink dress, for the boy in the treehouse, and for the years he had lost. Outside the door, the tactical team lowered their weapons. Commander Vance listened to the sobbing through the thin wood, and she signaled her men to stand down. Even Dr. Thorne turned away, unable to look at the door, the arrogance drained from his face by the raw sound of a soldier's soul breaking open. Emma held him while he wept, rocking him gently. She knew the siege wasn't over. Thorne would still try to take him. The Navy would still try to own him. But the ice was gone. The sniper had come in from the cold. The sun rose over St. Jude's Naval Hospital, painting the wet asphalt of the parking lot in shades of bruised purple and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt fragile, like thin glass. Inside the hospital, the war was far from over. It had just moved from the trauma bay to the boardroom. The disciplinary hearing was convened in the executive suite on the top floor, a room with mahogany tables and a panoramic view of the naval base. At one end of the table sat the hospital board, 3 stone-faced administrators and Dr. Oris Thorne, who looked impeccable and vindictive in a fresh suit. At the other end sat Emma Johnson. She wore her rumpled scrubs, her hands clasped on the polished wood. She had refused to go home and change. She wanted them to see the blood on her sleeve, Liam's blood. "The facts are not in dispute," Thorne said, his voice smooth and cold. "Ms. Johnson bypassed security, disabled a magnetic lock, assaulted a crash cart, and administered unauthorized psychological triggers to a critical patient. She endangered his life. Her license should be revoked immediately, and federal charges filed." The head administrator, a civilian with tired eyes, looked at Emma. "Ms. Johnson, do you deny these actions?" "I deny that I endangered his life," Emma said quietly. "I saved it." "You are not a doctor," Thorne snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "You are a nurse. You do not diagnose. You follow orders. You acted on a childhood fantasy and got lucky. That is not medicine. That is recklessness." "It was compassion," Emma shot back, her voice rising. "You were treating a condition, Dr. Thorne. I was treating a man. You saw a broken engine. I saw a soldier who was freezing to death inside his own head." "Compassion does not override protocol," Thorne shouted. "Enough." The word wasn't shouted, but it cut through the room like a knife. Commander Vance stood by the window, her back to the room. She turned around slowly. "Dr. Thorne," Vance said, "you claimed Chief Petty Officer Smith was a vegetable. You claimed he had permanent frontal lobe damage. You were preparing to sign the papers to have him transferred to a long-term care facility. Essentially, a warehouse for the living dead." "The medical data supported that conclusion," Thorne said defensively. "And yet," Vance continued, walking toward the table. This morning, Chief Petty Officer Smith is sitting up. He is eating solid food, and he is asking for the nurse who broke in to save him. Vance placed a file on the table. I spoke with Smith an hour ago. He gave a statement. Thorne scoffed. The man is delusional. His statement is inadmissible. He seems quite lucid to me, Vance said, opening the file. He stated that he was conscious during the entire shutdown period. He could hear you, Doctor. He heard you call him a lost cause. He heard you discuss his potential organ donation with the residents. Thorne went pale. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. He also stated, Vance read from the paper, that while he was trapped in a psychogenic loop, unable to move or speak, Nurse Johnson established a communication protocol using a pre-existing code. He considers her actions a successful extraction from hostile territory. He has officially designated her as his primary care provider. Vance looked up, her grey eyes locking onto Thorne. In the Navy, Doctor, we don't punish people who complete the mission. We promote them. This is a hospital, Thorne sputtered. You cannot dictate my staff. I can when the patient is a Tier 1 asset, Vance said icily. Ms. Johnson is hereby detailed to the Department of Naval Special Warfare as a medical liaison for Chief Smith's recovery. She is under my jurisdiction now. Unless you want to explain to the Admiral why you want to fire the woman who woke up the Wraith? The room fell silent. Thorne looked at the board members, but they were looking at the table, refusing to meet his eyes. They knew the politics of the situation. Thorne had lost. Vance turned to Emma. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Grab your things, Emma. You have a patient to attend to. Emma stood up, her legs shaking. She walked past Dr. Thorne, who wouldn't look at her. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back. Dr. Thorne, she said, you were right about one thing. I am just a nurse. I clean the wounds you're too important to touch. And sometimes, that's where the healing happens. She walked out, leaving the stunned silence of the boardroom behind her, 6 months later. The autumn air in the Shenandoah Valley was crisp and smelled of wood smoke and decaying leaves. The cabin sat near the edge of a small, glass-still lake, surrounded by towering pines that whispered in the wind. It was a secluded place, a safe house provided by the Navy for Liam's rehabilitation. Emma sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, holding a mug of cider. She watched Liam down by the water's edge. He was different now. The gaunt, spectral figure from the hospital bed was gone. He had gained weight, muscle mostly, though he still moved with a slight limp, a reminder of the atrophy. The scars on his chest had faded to silver. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The glacial ice had thawed. They were just blue now. A deep, human blue. He was sitting on a drift log, his head bent over something in his hands. Emma stood up and walked down the grassy slope to join him. As she got closer, she saw the pile of paper at his feet. Hundreds of them. White, blue, yellow, red. Paper cranes. They were everywhere. Perched on the log, nestled in the grass, floating near the edge of the water. You've been busy, Emma said softly, sitting down next to him. Liam didn't look up. His large, scarred fingers were manipulating a small square of gold foil paper with intense concentration. Fold. Crease. Tuck. Physical therapy, he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. Good for fine motor skills. At least that's what my nurse keeps telling me. She sounds bossy, Emma smiled. She is, Liam agreed. But she saved my life, so I let it slide. He finished the fold and held up the tiny gold crane. He placed it gently on the log next to the others. How many? Emma asked. 999, Liam said. He looked at the sea of paper birds around them. I started folding them the day we got here. Every time I had a nightmare, I folded a crane. Every time I saw the girl in the pink dress, I folded a crane. Every time I wanted to go back to the roof, I folded a crane. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single plain sheet of white notebook paper. It was old, yellowed at the edges. "Do you remember the legend?" he asked, looking at her. "If you fold 1,000 cranes, you get a wish," Emma recited. Liam nodded. He began to fold the final sheet. His hands were steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. He folded with the precision of a sniper and the gentleness of an artist. "When we were kids," Liam said, his eyes on the paper, "my wish was always to fly away, to be untouchable. I thought if I was far enough away, up in a tree or in a sniper nest 3,000 yards out, nothing could hurt me." He finished the crane. It was simple, stark white against his weathered hand. "I got my wish," he said quietly. "I became untouchable, and it almost killed me. I froze to death in that distance." He turned to Emma. He placed the 1,000th crane in her hand. "Make a wish, Liam," she whispered. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering on her cheek. His skin was warm. "I don't need to wish to fly away anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My wish is to stay, right here, with the wingman who came back for me." Emma closed her fingers around the paper bird, holding it against her heart. "Copy that, wingman." Liam leaned in, and when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or tragic. It was slow and steady. It tasted like cider and wood smoke. It tasted like life. Around them, the wind picked up, catching the hundreds of paper cranes scattered on the grass. They lifted into the air, a swirling cloud of color, dancing up toward the tree line. They looked like a flock of birds finally released from a cage, spiraling up into the vast, open sky. Liam watched them go, his arm around Emma's shoulders. He didn't need to follow them. He was already home. The medical charts will tell you that Chief Petty Officer Liam Smith recovered due to a combination of neuroplasticity and aggressive pharmacological intervention. They will cite Dr. Thorne's protocols and the advanced facilities of St. Jude's. But the charts are wrong. Medicine can restart a heart, but it cannot restart a soul. Science can map the brain, but it cannot map the labyrinth of grief a soldier walks alone. Liam Smith didn't come back because of a drug. He came back because, in a world that told him to be steel, someone remembered he was made of paper. He came back because one person refused to believe that silence meant absence. We all have rooftops. We all have moments where the cold feels safer than the pain of being human. We all build fortresses to keep the world out. But true strength isn't in how long you can hold your breath underwater. It's in trusting someone enough to let them pull you to the surface. So if you know someone who is fading, someone who has gone quiet, don't just check their vitals. Check their heart. Learn their call sign. Be the wingman who refuses to fly away. Because sometimes the only thing that can reach the dying is the memory of who they were before the war began. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone you love. You never know who might need a reminder that they are not alone. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the unseen battles we fight and the love that wins them.